And it's really an honor to come out and see all of you guys, because I don't often get an opportunity to speak among this population, even though I think really it's you guys who are the ones that need to hear this the most, because you're going to be the next leaders in the community, in the faith community. You guys are going to be the ones who are forwarding the baton into the places where you're going to be going, where you're going home to, where you're going to be pastoring, where you're going to be lecturing, where you're going to be writing books. You want to kind of have this knowledge or this inspiration behind you to kind of know there is something that the faith community can be doing. And so it's really an honor to be here, and certainly I think all of you are more learned and studied than I am. I've sort of learned this issue via experience, and it's taught me well, hopefully. So I grew up in church. Did anyone here also grow up in church? I'd be like, yeah, kind of it seems like that sort of lifestyle is pretty prevalent when you go into a seminary world. And I liked church. I really understood God on a personal and deep level. But once you've been in church, sometimes you kind of feel like you've heard it all. So in high school, like Sunday school class, I was always pretty confident that I could not pay attention, and then if the teacher ever called me for an answer to a question, I could just say Jesus, and I would have like a 70% likelihood of that being the right answer. And we would always joke about this with my friends. We're like, yeah, just say Jesus. You're at least not going to get a negative response from the teacher, depending on the question maybe. But if you just say Jesus, it's good. So your good canned answer. It's something you can kind of throw out there and like, yeah, I know I'm going to be safe, even if I'm not really paying attention. And then there is like this moment, and this happens to me occasionally, where I get to this point in my life and I go, oh my gosh, the answer really is Jesus. I can't believe it, and it takes on a whole new depth and new meaning because it becomes real. Somehow the concept of Jesus has left the ethereal realm of cognitive ideas and has broken down into my present reality and has become something that is powerful and transformative in a way that would never have reached me if I'd left it in the ethereal idea of my mind. And so hopefully through this time, before we get into the trafficking, we can kind of talk a little bit about what it means to make it real, because this is very real. These are people. The issue can be very sensationalized. We can talk about the travesty of the idea of prostitution. We can talk about the travesty of the idea of slavery. We can talk about a lot of ideas. But until you're looking in the face of a woman who has been sold on the streets of Las Vegas for several years, there's a disconnect almost. And I'm hoping that we can go on a journey to engage the reality of this, because Jesus really is the answer, but it isn't something that we can throw out casually as an idea. It's something that we have to embody in our lives in order for it to be the answer to those people. And so with that idea of being real, in my mind, it means tangible. It means substantial. It means it becomes concrete in the present here and now. It's manifested in the present and physical reality. And so hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to walk away with certain things that maybe we can do to make it concrete in the here and now in our lives. And think about the future and how it's going to become concrete for the people you're going to touch in the future in whatever facet or environment that you're in. Because until it does, it just stays an idea, and no one is ever going to experience the transformation of Jesus Christ. So with that, we're going to move into a little introductory snippet video coming out of Las Vegas. So that's a promotional snippet covering a documentary, which is actually online if you want to look it up. It's Surviving Sin City. It's put on by one of our service provider partners, Congo Justice. And not 3 days before that day aired, there was a summit in Las Vegas with the Attorney General's office, with the district attorneys, with prosecutors, county prosecutors, with the sheriff's department. And they all came together, and there was about 300 people packed into this room at UNLV. And I heard the Attorney General's office of Nevada look out into the crowd and say, we need the faith community on this issue because we don't have the resources to fight this. And that you don't see that everywhere in a climate where the government is doing everything that they possibly can to divorce themselves from any kind of religious affiliation. Here was this moment when the government themselves were saying, listen, the faith community has to stand and move in this Las Vegas community. They have to create a movement here amongst their parishioners, amongst their people, because otherwise we're going to fail on this. We do not have the resources to fight this. This is so big. And I've been able to see over the last 2.5 years, the organizations and the service providers in the faith community kind of struggle and develop legs to stand and start running and moving on this issue, starting this movement so that we can change an entire culture of Las Vegas. Now, our organization moved from New York to Las Vegas to actually start an internship program, which is how I got involved. And so we're based out of Las Vegas, but we work nationally with communities that are saying the same thing. We work with law enforcement, FBI, we work with Attorney General's office around the Super Bowl. We have partnerships and have done work in probably over 10 to 15 states in the United States. Because everywhere we go, people know about it. It's the cognitive idea, but when it comes into like really doing something, they're sort of like lost a little bit. And so I'm here, and it's interesting too, because I would say the faith community is really involved, but not as a community. So we'll work with nonprofits that are full of Christians. We work with police officers that are Christians. We work with politicians who are Christians. But when it comes to looking at faith community as a whole, churches as a whole, it's a little harder to get them as engaged. And there's a couple of reasons. If you come to my workshop tonight, I'll maybe talk a little bit about why I think that is. And some things that might have to change institutionally in our churches before we start seeing that really happen. But regardless of what we've seen so far, we are starting to see a movement in Las Vegas changing Sin City into Saint City. Changing where you kind of get this idea that in the darkness the light shines the brightest. And that's very true. That is absolutely true. There are places very, very, very church-oriented, but it's just so dull. So right here, as I'm here and I'm talking to you, I want to extend an invitation that this is your opportunity to lead the faith community in a movement. We want to start a movement where churches everywhere, faith leaders everywhere say as a unified body of Christ, we're going to stand against this issue, and it's going to go beyond just our words. It's going to go beyond our outrage. It's going to go beyond our righteous indignation. It's going to go into the pragmatics, into the real world. And I'm speaking to all of you as leaders. I know I've said this before, but I pray for boldness for all of you. Boldness to do church in a way that has never been done before. Because times are changing, and the arrow of time moves in one direction. And if we don't move with it, we're sort of left in the past. And believe me when I say we can't afford, these girls who are trapped in this industry can't afford that. The pimps who have known no other life than exploitation and money cannot afford us to stay in the past. The Johns who are trapped in sexual addiction that they cannot get out of, that is ruining their families, their jobs, their bodies, they can't afford to have us not be the forerunners of this issue. And what is this issue? So how many of you have heard about trafficking? I've been talking loosely. We've kind of heard something about trafficking, probably. Anyone seen the movie Taken? Liam Neeson. Who doesn't love a good vigilante movie? Denzel Washington, right? So if you've seen The Equalizer, I saw that yesterday with Moki. And as much as those things are true in some ways, it's not true in other ways. And certainly when I'm talking about trafficking, I'm not talking about a ring of the mob that are kidnapping our girls at the airport and selling them to a Saudi prince somewhere. That does happen. Don't get me wrong. That does absolutely happen. And it's awful. But what you see walking down the streets at night is certainly not what we would normally think of human trafficking. But it absolutely is. And it is not just trafficking, it is slavery. So Frederick Douglass said that they would not call it slavery, but they would call it by some other name. Now, Frederick Douglass is an abolition in the 1800s, and he's speaking prophetically to our time right now, They would not call it slavery. They would call it by some other name. Slavery has been fruitful in giving herself names, and it will come and give itself yet another name. And you and I and all of us had better wait and see what new monster this thing will take shape in, what new snake this skin will come forth. And I'm telling you right now that slavery has taken a new name. We call it human trafficking. And where once we kind of understood it as transporting blacks and Africans from their home country into the transatlantic slave trade, now it isn't a particular race. It is our women. It is our children. It will be the people in your pastor churches, congregations. It will be their daughters. It will be in your high school youth groups. It is already. It is already. And so we have to kind of recognize in some way, call it for what it is, but federally we call it slavery, but we also have the federal definition of trafficking, which is the exploitation of an individual through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of forced labor or commercial sex. Now, this is federally defined by the Trafficking Victim Protections Act, which started in 2008, has been renewed 2012, 2013, 2014. And that's when federally it became a crime to traffic someone. And notice what isn't included in that definition is the transport across borders. So included underneath that is not just the Asians that are being brought over to work in sweatshops or in laundry facilities, to work in hotels. It's not just the Latinos that are being smuggled from Mexico and South America. It's not just the Russians that are being put in our strip clubs in New York. That does include them, but it also includes the 13-year-old girl that got a boyfriend who is 25 and is selling her on Backpage in her own hometown. And that happens. That happens. One of the mothers that we work with in Las Vegas is a middle-class mom. Her husband worked for the FBI, was a supervisor for the FBI in Las Vegas. She was a nurse. Married, had 2 successful older sons, gone off to the military, other professions, an older daughter, married now, younger daughter, self-esteem issues, but who doesn't? You're 15. I had self-esteem issues when I was 15, depression, teenage angst, that's just the phase, right? And she started becoming violent, and she started doing all these things, and you're like, man. But she got a boyfriend, right? And this guy was amazing. Would come over, made friends with the mom, with the dad, would bring her presents, and her life just seemed to normalize and get better. Like, he was just everything to her. And for a while, it was good. It was for a while. And she's 16 and a half, and things just, she's getting STDs, you know. She did the rebellious thing, went and got a tattoo that he designed for her. Girls these days, it's such a disrespectful thing. But nothing says, mark my property like, get a tattoo. But, you know, I mean, that's everywhere. I mean, if you're in high school, like in some of the, like, not Ivy League high schools, but like like where I was in high school, like, that just happens. And they kept having these troubles, and she stopped doing well in school, and then she quit all of her extracurricular activities to spend with this boy, and then suddenly she just was wearing all these clothes that her mom didn't buy her, and it's so funky, like, and then maybe a little slutty too, and she didn't wear, like, she stopped listening to Taylor Swift and started listening to Southcore rap, and then, you know, just kind of like, and then all the STDs, and her mom was thinking drugs. Maybe she's selling drugs. Maybe she's doing drugs. This is where the moms go, right? And it wasn't until the Las Vegas Vice contacted her about her daughter being advertised on Backpage did she even realize that her daughter was living at her house, going to school, and sneaking out at night and selling herself under this pimp, her boyfriend, right under her nose, didn't even know. That's kind of what we're seeing. And the slavery is important to say because this is really what's happening. But in 21st century America, it's not chains and whips and force in the way that we understand chains and whips and force. In 21st century America, slavery is the shackles of the mind. And for the ones who want to profit from those shackles, the vulnerable mind is ripe. to exploit at a professional level, a PhD professional level. These guys are smart. Well, they're smart and they're not smart, but they really know how to read people. And they're charismatic. They're the best. They are the entrepreneurs of the ghetto. Like, if these people went to MIT, they would revolutionize business. But they know that they can clear 40 grand a week selling girls across the internet. They don't even have to graduate from high school. They just know how to manipulate and brainwash and use force in a way, and threats in a way that intimidate. And it's pervasive in such a way that it's difficult to even name when you see it, because it could go either way. It could go either way. And while we maybe don't understand or aren't necessarily aware of how it really is going on right underneath our noses, I assure you, it is not as far away from you as you think it is. It is not as discriminating as you think. So I hear a lot of people talking about it's like a black issue, or it's a poor issue, or it's a foreign national issue. Not true. Not true. Not true. It is much more a poverty of the mind, poverty of the soul issue. And it's definitely more of an industry than you think. So you may have heard the little clip in the movie where the assemblyman was saying that it's projected that human trafficking will be the #1 illicit industry in the world, profitable industry in the world. And actually, it's #2 next to drug smuggling, I think. And when we're talking about profitability of an industry, we're talking $32 billion a year. And this is very difficult to gauge because it's all black market, so where do we even really get these numbers? But according to the UN tip report, $32 billion a year, like that's more than Google, Nike, Starbucks combined. It's that profitable. There was a young man at my church who started coming. I wasn't there when he started, but he was there when I started going to my church. And he just started coming with his girlfriend. Or his wife, actually. I think he was married to her at the time. And he was kind of a nice Joe. He kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And my church is planted in the inner city. It planted in one of the worst areas of the town, and just by their presence and serving the community, things have really changed and revolutionized in that part of the town. It's not Crack Alley anymore. They still call it Naked City, but well. So it's not Crack Alley anymore. The crime rate has dropped. The gangs have moved out. The the drug dealers who didn't convert to Christianity and accept Jesus and be transformed all left, and now low-income families are starting to move in, which is a huge testament, right? So this guy keeps coming, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, yeah, it's good, great, nice, Joe, that's what's going on. And within like 2 months, he confessed that he was a pimp, that he'd been selling 10 girls online somewhere throughout the country, actually. He'd just meet them over social media, and he convinced them to start selling themselves for sex and giving him all the money. And he said he couldn't do it anymore. He was so convicted, he couldn't do it anymore. He burned his social media, he burned all of his throwaway cell phones, and he left it behind. So he's giving his testimony about what this issue is like, because certainly everyone in my church has daughters who are going to be vulnerable. And he says in his heyday, he was clearing 100 grand a week. 100 grand a week. That is a lot of money. Oh my gosh. And I was like, no, you're lying. But I was sitting in the pew and I'm like, you're lying. You're just making that number up. But if you're selling 15 girls a night, and sometimes they'll make $1,500 an hour. They'll sell it all night. I mean, they're making 10 grand a night. You can make 100 grand in a week. All 10 girls making 10 grand a night. You can do it. And men are willing to pay for it. And so there's this draw where you have the young men in the ghetto who don't have like a future, who's glorified in this pop culture, and they're thinking, I don't have to graduate high school. I can go make 100 grand right now. And they can play the status and they can play the materialism. Now, there's some underlying themes here, right? So for the male side who are entering the industry, who are becoming pimps, they want status, they want money. That's really all it's about. And they have sold themselves out to status and money that they don't care who they have to destroy. They don't care. On the women's side, for the girls who are being exploited, it's about value. It's about being beautiful. It's about having an identity and being valued by a man, feeling like you have respect again. And this is actually really, really important. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. So this picture, and that's my buddy Carl. We do outreach at the Super Bowl. And if you're in the trafficking world, there's such a big debate on whether or not the Super Bowl increases trafficking in the host city or doesn't. It does. It maybe isn't the #1 day for trafficking, which the naysayers will argue, but it definitely increases. So this is my buddy Carl, and we're sent out in twos. This is in 2013, New Orleans, so I was on Bourbon Street. This is a Saturday night before the Super Bowl game. And we have a book. We work with Class Kids, which is a National Missing Kids organization in Florida, and we work every year with them and the FBI and local law enforcement. They do search and rescue trainings. They operate on stings. I just get sent out with a book of missing kids. So I look at the missing kids, and these are girls that are likely to be in the area, that are at the right age or circumstance to be trafficked. We don't know if they are or they aren't. But we're going out, and we're looking to see if there's any minors on Bourbon Street. So you're not supposed to be a minor on Bourbon Street. And you see a young girl who's potentially in the book. Here we are. Well, okay, so this is my buddy Carl, so you can't go out by yourself, and you can't go out without a man. So the girl on his side there, and then the two that you can kind of see full on, those were both in our books, and they're 15 and 16. They were coming from Georgia, but they were in Louisiana. Now, the baseball hat behind her head is someone that we would call the bottom. Now, the bottom, in the pimping street world, we call, so you have the pimp, you have the main man who's controlling all of his girls, and the whole thing is called, he has a stable, so all the girls are his stable. And the hierarchy within the stable, the bottom girl is the top. And don't ask me to explain why. And so she's the one who doesn't necessarily sell herself, but she grooms and prepares the other girls, and she watches them for him. And so these are his two new girls, and it looks like maybe they went to Walmart and got some cheap lingerie and did the same dye, so they're wearing the same thing. And she's out there training them how to sell. Now, here's my buddy Carl, and we're pretending like we don't really know what's going on, so I can get the picture. We can send it to the FBI for a tip. And he's acting all drunk. Now, look at her expression. Doesn't she kind of look like, oh, God, I might have to sleep with him? It does to me. She's just like this. But there's this constant monitoring and everything that's going on. And you look at her and you think, well, what's her story? How did she get there? Like, what's the profile here? Like, what led her into this lifestyle? And her story might, I don't know, but I could maybe tell a good story just to kind of assume, maybe she's like the majority of her friends in her community, where she has no dad or an abusive dad. Abusive boyfriend. Actually, it's probably mom's boyfriend. I hear that more often than not, mom's abusive boyfriend. So mom's there, working all the time. Maybe she's depressed. They're probably on welfare. And this, I know she's black, but I've heard this from a white girl in the industry also. So mom's struggling on welfare. Maybe you know what? She's working as hard as she can to put food on the table for her and her sisters. And she's trying really hard, but she's working 2 or 3 jobs, and she can't pay attention. And so here's this girl, and she's got a lot of free time. And maybe she's not doing so well in school, but no one really pays attention to her. And all of the guys are now starting to really look at her. You're kind of pretty. You can get attention. You can be someone. You can be of a value to them. And maybe you would be a nobody if you didn't start doing sexual favors for them. A nobody. And maybe this guy comes along, and he's a little bit older, and it's cool because he can pay for things for you in a way that your mom never could provide for you. And maybe you've already experienced some sexual abuse in the past. Actually, as an aside, 90 to 95% of the girls working in prostitution have experienced childhood sexual abuse before entering the industry. And when you consider that 1 in 4 women in the United States will experience sexual abuse before they're 18, you can kind of see how this is a bigger problem than just a black community or an Asian community or a poor community. The majority of my friends I know who've experienced childhood sexual abuse were in upper middle class. But it creates a vulnerability. So she's already been treated and told that her highest value in society is her sex and her body, and that the only way she's going to be valued and loved by a man is if she puts out. And here's this older guy, and he's treating her like a gentleman for the first time, and she means something to him. And he's telling her that he's proud of her and that she is beautiful. And it doesn't matter what all those other losers see. They don't love you as much as I love you. They don't see what I see. And for the first 6 months, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. And there's always an then. Because the narrative that he's spinning her, the narrative that he's playing her, is a lie. It's a counterfeit. But it's something that she so desperately needs to believe for herself in order to feel like she matters. She's going to believe it. And she's 15, right? And Taylor Swift fans, if you're 15, someone tells you he loves you, you believe him. It's kind of true. It's kind of true. And so when you've been alienated from your entire support system, not that there was much of one anyway, and all of your best girlfriends are starting to sell themselves, and it just seems like a cool idea, you have a fight with your mom, you're going to go to your best guy friend, and you're going to run away with him. And now you're in New Orleans, and he's threatening your mom. He's threatening your sister. He's threatening you, beating other girls in a stable at random for no reason, just to make sure you know that he's here with you, that he's ultimately the one in control. You can't get out. You can't get out. And it's not unlike Stockholm Syndrome. It's not unlike certain things we saw in the prisoners of war POW camps. The brainwashing is so severe. My pastor's wife was in the industry for 40 years. And she was kidnapped. She was in there for 40 years and would never call herself a victim of anything. She thinks she chose that. That's difficult to deal with. How do we reach these people? Now, you think, well, maybe it's not as severe as you think it is. And I have an article here I'm going to read to you. This is actually a case that came down in Vegas recently. And my director helped the victim when she was initially found and put in the hospital. This is written by an author, a reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is the city newspaper, John Smith. And he writes, dog lovers, bless their hearts, are a fierce and vocal bunch. I'm not a dog person. If some moron gets caught abusing a pit bull or locking a Shih Tzu in a parked car, the animal defenders rise and bark incessantly on behalf of their canine friends. They write hundreds of letters and emails expressing their outrage. Should an abuse case happen to proceed to trial, the dog lovers are known to pack a courtroom. With a certain logic, they'll remind you that animals are not like humans. They can't defend itself the way a person can. If we don't stand for Fido, who will? If only the Strip's army of local street prostitutes received as much respect as some suffering pets. It would be refreshing to see a vocal segment of the community rise and shout its righteous indignation over the brutality inflicted on an endless lineup of young women battered and even murdered in the name of sex commerce in Las Vegas. It hasn't happened, at least not yet. Despite increased efforts to generate public support by members of law enforcement and clergy, and no small amount of money, that's true, spent to raise awareness on sex trafficking, the carnage continues apace. The latest example of the brutality inherent in the business is a case of a prostitute under the control of alleged pimp Robert Sharp III. The teen was tortured over a period of 4 months before being dumped near University Medical Center on June 30th with internal injuries, a spinal fracture, and the undeniable signs of torture. Sharp, 28, was arrested Tuesday and charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, domestic battery, sex trafficking, and a list of other felonies. Law enforcement sources say Sharp is related to pimp Raymond C. Sharp, and this is interesting because the majority of pimps in the industry have had individuals, family members that are in the industry, either a pimp or a prostitute, I think like 72%. So it's not unusual to see it as a family business. So his dad, Raymond C. Sharp, was convicted of kidnapping and pandering in 2011 and sentenced to 3 life sentences. This case, says Vice Lieutenant Karen Hughes, who is a strong Christian woman that we work alongside with in Vegas, is entirely one of the worst that we've seen. Young women lose their lives, and she was probably days away from dying, although, no, don't do this. And technology fails me. Although she was days away from dying, although lots of cases have the recurring theme, in this case, the degree of torture and beatings made it one of the worst I've experienced. And that's saying a great deal. So he goes on to add a list of other cases that we've seen in Las Vegas, right underneath the populace's nose, in varying degrees of severity. There's Anthony Smith, who decided to discipline one of his girls with an aluminum bat. He hit her so hard, he bent the metal of the bat over her body. There's Marshall Green, used a belt to inflict injuries, internal injuries, on his girl, Alicia Lee, before finally asphyxiating her 3 hours after torture began. There's a pimp, Shane LaFleur, who shot his reluctant employee in the head, attempting to make it look like a suicide. There's Young Park, whose escort business associates killed her, set her body on fire over a financial disagreement. And he ends, he says, "Where's the public outcry for the victims of this violence?" And I'm only saying this because I think it's really important for us to realize that those are people. That could be your daughter. And I've stared in the face of parents whose daughters are missing, who are wondering if that's what's happening to their daughter. And we're talking about torture, we're not talking. I saw in a training this September given by Lieutenant Hughes, and she showed pictures. I think this is when it really became real to me, that she showed pictures of a girl. Now, pimps will brand their girls through tattoos. And so it's like the sign that you're in his stable, you're in his family, and they call it family, is through this branding. Now, this girl ran away, wanted out, ran away, got away. Is found again, because it's such a strong network of communication. It's very difficult to get away without people knowing where you are. And her pimp and the bottom girl held her down and ironed off, with a fabric iron, ironed off her tattoos. So I see pictures of this woman whose skin is just burned off where the tattoos had been, as they held her down and took it away. It's kind of saying, if you leave me, you leave with nothing. And so legally, when we think about prosecuting these cases, it can be very difficult. So federally, we understand the definition. You have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. What's important in the law is that if you are a minor working in the sex industry, you're automatically defined as a trafficked victim because you can't consent. But if you're an adult, you have to be brave enough to testify in order for them to prosecute, period. That's just the way it is. You have to be willing to testify. And in an industry where the networks between the pimps are so controlled, and so, it is the best network system you have ever wanted. The potential to get someone to testify, to be brave enough to feel like they can stand against someone who's done that to them, it's difficult. It's really difficult. This woman did go to trial and did testify against her pimp. It was a couple of weeks ago. And that's good for her. Where's our community? Where are our churches? The difficult part about this, too, is that everyone enters so young. I don't think the church community really realizes this. According to the Polaris Project, the average age a girl enters prostitution in the United States is 13. There's a couple of reasons for this. You make more money from a younger girl. And you're younger. You're not emotionally mature yet. It's a lot easier to manipulate someone who's 13 than someone who's 25. And that says something interesting to me, because you kind of think an average, well, you got like a 50% mark, you know. So you mean like 50% of them were either 13 or younger. And then depending on the distribution of the curve, I mean, maybe this external, line here, maybe that's 18 years old. And you kind of think, well, maybe 70 to 80% of the girls every year entering prostitution would legally be defined as trafficked victims. And so when we're meeting that 21, 22, 23, 30, 35-year-old woman who's been in the life for 15 years, or, we don't know how long, you're like, wow, you chose this. You're an adult. What was the likelihood that when she actually got in, she just aged out of legally being defined as a victim? That's all that happened. And we have to kind of change our mindset as a community and as a church, the age of vulnerability, but then also the place that current prostitutes are in right now. And I know we're talking about commercial sex trafficking a lot. We do some with labor trafficking, but primarily this is what we focus on because this is happening. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, which is consistently found like one of the best places to live in America. And last year we helped a mom recover her missing girl that was being advertised on Backpage for sexual services. She was 16. It happens there. It happens everywhere. And we have to kind of understand that vulnerability is a mindset, not a physical condition. Anyone a Netflix fan? Of course. British TV, I Call the Midwife, anyone? There's an episode where it's set in the 1950s, and it was covering this trafficking case, and this midwife nurse is talking to this priest who had established a home for them. And he said, listen, poverty is not lack of food. Poverty is not lacking a place to live. Poverty is never having been loved. Poverty is never having been respected or having dignity. That's poverty. And I'm saying this because that poverty is not an economic status. That poverty is not a racial status or an ethnic status. That poverty is actually becoming bigger and bigger and bigger in our society, among our churches, among our families. That kind of poverty is increasing. And it's increasing amongst the wealthy and amongst the poor alike. Never having been loved, never having been respected. If you look at the majority of our pop culture, respect is not anything that they're really trying to teach our daughters or show our daughters. Respect just isn't there. So you can be that upper middle class white girl in high school and be impoverished because no one loved you. And I think that's really, really important because when the traffickers sell a girl an idea, he's selling her a counterfeit. He's selling her a counterfeit of love. I'm going to love you. I remember watching an interview with an ex-working girl who was talking about her experience in Reno and how she came, after being out of the life, she found her pimp with his stable out on the street, and she approached him. What are you doing? And confronted him. And he says, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm sorry if I cuss, this is how they speak. He said, listen, I'm giving these bitches the only love they're ever going to know. And it's true. And that's probably the only love that they have ever known. And they hold on to it as their last grasp and hope that they're going to be loved at all. They sell them on dreams. You can make a lot of money. Girl, you come work with me. We're going to go to Paris. We'll just work this for a little while, and then me and you, we'll go somewhere far away. They won't know what we've done. We'll have all this money. My pastor's wife, before getting out of the industry, he would pull up his bank statement. See here, I've got this sum set away for you. And afterwards, she's telling me the story. I'm looking at it, and I believe him. Here's our money. It's in his account. It's right there. And she looks at me, and she's like, why don't you put that in my name? Why don't you put that in my name? No, you just don't think that way because they're spinning the dream so much. And this is from girls who've been told they're going to be nothing. They have nothing to offer society. They want the dream. They give you a counterfeit of family, quite literally. They call themselves a family. He becomes their daddy. That's the lingo. The other girls in the stable with you are your wife-in-laws. I'm his wifey. The lingo right there, that setup, is trying to get you into this mindset that we're family. It's like a gang mentality. It's a counterfeit relationships. I'm committed to you. I'm your boyfriend. I'm your daddy. We're counterfeit relationships that are based on conditions and performance, that are based on degradation and demeaning. I've heard stories of pimps that have so controlled their girls that at any point in the room, he says down, and she will come and lay next to him like a dog. Because he can insert that much authority over her. that she knows she has to just do it. Because she knows what will happen if she doesn't. She doesn't know how to get out. And sometimes they'll set it up so that they'll have their buddies in police uniforms come over and rape and gang rape, just so that they know, police aren't going to help you. They know you're a hoe. They know you're a whore. They're never going to help you. And it's even worse when the police are actually purchasing the services. It does happen. So it's this counterfeit. There was an article on Google, which has since been taken down because of outrage, written by a pimp, who said, listen, we can control them using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. And when you think about all of the ways in which they're manipulating and all the counterfeits they're selling, doesn't it kind of think we have the real thing? We have Jesus. We have the real thing. For every counterfeit they're selling them, we have the real thing. We have real love. We have a love that's not conditional. We have a love that will restore your dignity. We have family. We have community in our churches. We have family that will accept you and will help you. We have relationships that are beyond manipulation, that you can trust. We have dreams that are restoring your identity in Christ. We have the answer. We have Jesus. We have Jesus. And people, for the girls, they don't trust it at first. They'll turn you down. They will test you. They will manipulate you. They will lie. They will take from you, because that is the only thing that they have ever known, is lying and manipulation and stealing and getting what you want, because that is all that they've ever gotten. And we have to keep giving, because one day they're going to see that it's the real thing. And when that happens, when it's the genuine, they know they're a fool if they keep settling for the counterfeit. They know. They know. And they are so hungry for it. They will come into Christ, and Christ will make them over, and they will stand and become victors for everyone else in the industry, because they will have victory over that evil, and they will have known the light, and they will have known the way out, and they will lead people out. And we can be the church doing that for them. And I've seen it happen. And the answer is Jesus. Not cognitive theology or ideas, not that those things are bad, but in concrete living out the life of Jesus Christ incarnationally. That's difficult. And so I'm part of an organization called F.R.E.E International, because I don't go into a church where someone doesn't say, I really want to do something. And we got to pull them in. What can we do? So F.R.E.E International works nationally. And we're a connecting point. So we go to churches and we prepare them to go on mission. We have projects. We go into the hospitality organization. We train the no-tell motels about trafficking, and they don't really care, but you keep going. We work with women who go into the brothels. When I'm going home on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, I'm leaving for a 3-day trip in Nevada to go visit all the brothels of Nevada. And these are girls who are working there legally and illegally, who are being trafficked, who are there because they have no other choice, who are there because circumstances haven't given them any choice, not just the trafficker. And they love Jesus. They want to believe that there's a better life for them. If we don't go, who will tell them? We do search and rescue training. We'll do awareness and education and training. We'll work with churches about contextually what's going on in their community. But we're also connected with service providers, Salvation Army, social workers, law enforcement, providing services for them. We're almost getting ready to open our Oasis Shelter project. I run an internship program that brings in students who have graduated with experience, and we can farm them out to the service providers who are so desperate for man hours, they can't hire anyone more. They don't have the money. But I can give them a student graduated with social work, and they can work with them 20, 30 hours a week running social work, doing caseloads, helping to relieve some pressure and some of that tension. Pro bono services. Our churches are full of lawyers and doctors and counselors and educators. So if we can create a network, it takes a network to defeat a network. If we can create a network within our churches where these professionals are willing to give 10 hours a month, 10 pro bono hours a month to visit, to be a gynecologist that sees girls that we can train. We, as an organization, will train. And they can go in and just treat girls and whatever their physical needs are. They can they can provide casework for them, CPS services, trying to get their kids back. I mean, they need care. We run school assembly programs for part of our peer intervention and prevention. And one of the speakers at the school assembly program is a survivor. And she says if her church hadn't paid for her 2 months' rent, she would be in the life right now. Because it's true, you leave that life, you leave with nothing. You walk away from everything. You can't get a job. You've been in the life for 15 years. Where you been working? You're going to tell them I was a prostitute? Like, no. Like, how do you get a job? You haven't graduated from high school. How do you get a GED? While you have 2 kids and you need to pay rent. How are you going to do it? Our churches, that's how. Our churches. Because we can provide that. And it takes time, and so we'll go into some more specifics for the thing tonight, the workshop tonight, about specifically what can be done in your own communities to kind of be a connecting point and a networking point to bring them all together. But we do a lot. I'm more familiar with Vegas because I don't travel that much. I've got my little hub here, and there's plenty of work for everyone. But to start the dialogue going, what concretely can we do here? What concretely can we do here? And I think, and I get this a lot when I go into churches, is that they know the issue, right? It's a lot easier to talk about the issue. They're like, yeah, I want to do something. And my colleagues and I talk about this all the time, and I don't regularly watch South Park. I just heard about this episode in one of my econ classes, and it stuck. So it's where like all these gnomes are stealing the underpants in the South Park world. So they get to the bottom of it, and here's the gnomes, and they have all their underwear, and they're like, what are you going to do with this underwear? And the gnomes are like, phase 1, steal underwear. Hey, Bob, what's phase 2? What's phase 2? And so he goes to the screen, and he says this, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, profit. And I think sometimes we're stuck in that about these social justice issues. And so we get to this place where phase 1, we know about it, we want to do something. Phase 2, phase 3, transformation, kingdom work. And what is that phase, that elusive phase 2? We're always trying to put concreteness together so that we get to where we're going. And that's primarily, that's pretty much what Free International is doing. Is we get everyone to the phase 1 and we dialogue about what phase 2 will look like for you. As a church organization, it always works better to work as a body out of your church. So we don't take volunteers. We want to equip and facilitate leaders in their communities themselves. We can't build ourselves up. We can't facilitate building ourselves up. But we will empower each of you to do something. And that's really important. That is really, really important. We've noticed that there's a lot of social justice fads going on. Social justice itself is a new fad in society. Like, well, there's a lot of causes too. I think breast cancer awareness is kind of like how many millions have been raised for breast cancer awareness from Race for the Cure, right? Or, and that's been kind of successful. I mean, at one time, smoking was really popular, and now it's not so much. And now weed is popular, and I'm like, I don't get this. Oh, well. History repeats itself. So like, okay, they've been successful. There's been others that maybe haven't been as successful. Kony 2012, does anyone really know what happened to Kony 2012? I don't know what happened to Kony 2012. It was like this big thing for a few months and then it's gone. What does that accomplish? Nothing. Or maybe it's kind of like equal success, equal failure. ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was the big recent one, but has that really like led to concrete differences? I don't know. And I think it's kind of difficult as faith leaders which social justice issues we're going to kind of jump on board and what do we do with this whole social justice fad? Is it a fad? Which ones are fad? Which ones are real? And I can, from where I stand, I see a lot of interesting things. I see that we're experiencing a social justice revolution in some ways, where our culture, my generation, cares much less about personal piety and much more about a community sense of justice. And we're passionate about that. That's not going away. I think alongside all of that, too, is that there's a general sense of skepticism and jadedness towards institutions, period, and even more religious institutions, where we aren't willing to cover up the sins of the past anymore, I guess, within government, within philosophies or certain things and that's very a postmodern idea. So it's not new that this is what's going on. And I think that social justice is the prime golden opportunity for our faith leaders, because this is where the church can be the most relevant. Social justice is what will propel us into the front lines of being relevant in an ever more jaded and skeptical culture. And the opportunity to jump on that train, not because everyone else is going to like it, but because we really believe that Jesus is the answer. And we know that he will lead to transformation by the power of the Holy Spirit to restore his kingdom and righteousness and restore his people to him. Because we know that, and we know that that is real, we will be the leaders in the social justice world. And we can be that. And if we miss out on that, if we miss that train, we will only fall further and further into a season of past and irrelevance to a culture that desperately needs something more than a counterfeit for everyone. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I do what I do. I'm a little bit early or maybe a little bit late, but I want to open it up for questions. And I think, yeah. So if we want to open it up for questions, I don't know, Rachel, if you want to kind of facilitate people asking. I think we have good acoustics in here, so you probably don't need a microphone per se. Oh, for the recording? Oh, okay.
The context that I come from is a bit different,
Sure.
I think, as you know. But you talked about just how people are locked in the mindset, and they don't realize that they're victims, and they may not. So they want love, right? I understand that as a 13-year-old. But do they at some point realize that they are victims? And then, because in other countries, I think what happens is that they're in a system of gangs who become pimps, and they're controlled, and they're controlled by fear as well as a debt. But it doesn't seem like that's the case here. So I'm just wondering, how easy is it for them to get to that point of realization that I'm being abused? And if someone tells them about Jesus, they get out. Because overseas, it's actually even worse. It's impossible to get out.
Yeah. I'm just going to put a little context behind your question, and then hopefully I'll get to your question, because foreign victims, foreign trafficking, not necessarily overseas. So on average, I think the FBI estimates anywhere from 18 to 20,000 foreign victims are trafficked in to the United States to work. I think that number is really low for political reasons personally, but everyone that I've talked to says much easier to help a foreign victim out once the institutions are gone. So they'll come in and they have the debt bondage, right? So they feel like they owe $50,000 at 20% interest every month, and they have to work off their debt in order to come and be set free in the United States. Of course, it's set up in such a way that they're never going to get out, and they're just there making a bunch of money, or making money for someone else. So that absolutely happens. And it is like that. And it is because the institutions, the external circumstances play in, I know at least for the Asian world, the sense of honor, of needing to pay back debt, the sense that you're there paying into your family, right? So you're there, working. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. The fear plays in domestic cases a lot differently. There is absolutely fear. There is a lot of psychology, too, where everything needs to look good on the outside. You're almost trying to trick yourself because you don't believe in something else. You don't believe that there's ever going to be a different life for you. So for the foreign victim, they are afraid to get out because of the violence, because of the threats, because they know that their gangs are going to go to their families, and that is legitimate. That is absolutely going to happen. And that's frightening because it is so international and so difficult. It is like working with that. So in a domestic sense, the fear is almost that you're going to leave and find that there is nothing else for you. That you almost believe, and a lot of girls will say this because of the grooming process, and because in some sick way there's a continuation of abuse throughout your life. You get abused as a child, and there is a sign for every pedophile written across your forehead that says, "Abuse me." I don't know how to explain this. I've heard this from professionals. And in some ways, I've maybe experienced it just a little, and I'm like, this is really annoying. I gotta get rid of this sign. This is frustrating. So there's this sense of like cosmic destiny. Prostitution chose you. This is what you were made for. This is your life. There is nothing else for you. This is your purpose. And that even goes back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because once you get into that self-actualization, once you've self-actualized as a prostitute, as a whore, as the most hated, where do you go? What do you believe else for yourself? How do you have dreams outside of what you've actualized in? And so the fear is in finding out that this really is all you're worth. And you got to hold on to what is something when you know you're just going to go off into nothing. And no one's going to love you or accept you back. If someone ever finds out, you're done. And it is very difficult to leave that, which is, I mean, and you can kind of tell by some of the abuse stories, like that's regular. That's very regular for the violence. So there is that sense of, oh my gosh, daddy's going to beat me. But then, oh my gosh, daddy won't be proud of me. Daddy won't love me, won't give me value. Daddy won't respect me. Now suddenly, pimp is a god, and you'll do whatever you can to make that God approve of you. Which is why I think Jesus ultimately is the only one that will restore you. So I've seen victims that have come out because of circumstances that they've created for themselves, and they've helped themselves out. And I've seen girls who have left the industry because Jesus has absolutely rescued them. And it is a marked difference, where one, I would say, is only a survivor, and the other, and will continue to only survive. And then the other will actually have a restored life and a restored identity, because Jesus is the only one who's going to be able to reclaim that self-actualization and return to you the identity and the purpose that he made you. So there is a lot of difference between that. And by all accounts, people in the service provider world, ICE, detectives, I've heard from when I studied, it's like foreign victims are so much easier to deal with, because once you get those institutions, once you remove the fear, they really believe in it's something better for them. And this is also really interesting, is that the difference between a child sexual abuse victim and a child in commercial sex is very different. And you think maybe it's the same, but when you're in commercial sex, your culture and your community is excited by what you do. Where if you're a child sexual abuse, they're horrified. For a girl who's in the commercial sex industry, she feels empowered. For a girl who's in childhood sexual abuse, she feels disempowered. And I think it's that sense of empowerment that also, you got to convince them that they're not empowered, that they're not now finally getting their last word on men who've abused them all their life. Like, it's very difficult. Did that clarify? I hope I answered yes. Now that the rest of you have had a chance to kind of process open questions.
All right. Still don't know how to ask the question, but how does a church, for example, embrace, for example, a prostitute who's still a prostitute, or one who is perhaps wanting to get out of it but isn't yet, and so let's say she'll come as a prostitute she'll leave, and like every Sunday you see her, she's still in the life, or a pimp who's still in the life, but he's still coming to church. How do you think that would look like, or is it that even the way that we structure our churches, that it's not possible, right? So, because I'm thinking more of like the way I see sometimes maybe like the majority culture, majority church culture, it's really just catered to people who are like either in the middle class or above, right? So if you say that we're welcoming everybody, but everybody looks like just like you. If prostitutes come in, or pimps, or even like just people who are like at the bottom, if they come in, then it's gonna be a problem, right? So like thinking like from that context, how would we either like embrace them, or is it not even possible to embrace prostitutes and pimps in churches?
I've thought a lot about this, and I know you and I have talked somewhat, some of the difficulties. And I never thought I would use this word, because the person who was saying it to me, I thought that is such a stupid concept. But she was using this word called otherness. What is otherness? It's ethereal. She was using it in terms of race, but I think it works pretty well with people in the life or in the game, so we call it a game. And that includes actually Johns or pimps or working girls, victims, because the counterfeit reality that they're in, you all are squares. We're living the life. We're living it up. You don't even know what it's like. You don't even know. So whatever you talk, I'm not going to listen to you. That is not a church institutional problem. That is just the nature of the spiritual deception. Now, if we're going to change someone's mindset, you can't do it except through grace, time, and vision. I mean, there are plenty of examples where Jesus' disciples just failed it. He's talking, and they're like, and and then they respond like, when are you going to set up your kingdom? And you're like, yeah. And so he responded with more grace and more time and more vision. And you can't do that unless you engage the culture that they're in. You can't do that unless you engage the culture that they're in. Now, I've seen the sort of white charismatic churches bring in a lot of that kind of lifestyle in that society, but it winds up being really underground. So, like, they'll come wearing their brand name, and they do wear expensive clothes because that's part of the look. So they'll have the manicure, the hair, the dress, the heels. They will be dressed well. And they can slide in, go to service, and slide out, and no one really knows the better. And in some ways, it has to happen that way, just to kind of feel like, oh, okay, I can come here and not be absolutely judged. But in some ways, we have to be proactive in engaging that population. So right now, church over here, the game world over here. And we just need to kind of like bring them closer together so that there's a rub. There's going to be a rub, and there's going to be a lot of friction, and there's going to be a lot of mistakes, and it will really test your faith. It will absolutely test your faith. You guys are going to roast me at the stake, I know, but so the brothel partners that I work with, so Nevada's the only state in the union that has legalized prostitution, not in Las Vegas, only in counties with less than 500,000 people. So here's these two little old ladies whose God is telling them to go into the brothels and make friends with all the prostitutes. And so they go in, and they're known as the church ladies. They've been going for 8 years. They're the church ladies. They're, mom, and their grandma. They bring in, gifts, celebrate their birthdays. They bring in Joyce Meyer, they bring in the Bible, they bring in whatever, they pray with them. And there are girls there who are getting saved and are leaving. There are girls there who are getting saved and staying and are reading scripture and are praying with one another, and they're staying. And there's going to be a rub. That rubs me. I don't know if anyone else in this room is going, ugh. But that rubs me. That rubs me. And it rubbed me the first time I saw it. I'm like, well, let's see, maybe we're not challenging them to get out. Maybe like, and the only thing that I can think of is that it's not our job to transform them. I cannot transform anyone, and I've tried. I've tried really hard in transforming people. Really, it doesn't end well, and then it always winds up they look more like what I want them to be than what God wants them to be, and whatever. So we go in, when we engage the population, and by engage, I mean getting out of our pews and going down to the track where the girls are working. When we engage that population, we have to have healthy expectations of what God can and can't do. And we pray for what God can do. And we let God do what he wants to do. And we have to trust that he's going to do in their lives what he wants done in their lives. And we can be the best we can to facilitate and encourage and exhort. And we preach the truth. Because if you try and lie, they know. They know when you're lying. And exhort and disciple, and it's messy, and it's not going to look one way, and some people think we're going to be too challenging, and some people are going to be mad that we're challenging at all, and that's just the way it is. There's going to be a rub. It's going to be messy. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to change, and it's going to be very imperfect. It just is. I'm really sorry that it is that way, but that is just the way it is. And the gospel prevails, and people leave, and people are transformed, and people will get out. And the Holy Spirit prevails. But when we go into churches, the first thing I ask, you going to pray? You going to pray? Really pray. Not like, yeah, I'll popcorn pray. Like, I get that. You know, you're there, and you're like, I'll popcorn pray. But listen, are you going to pray for 2 hours every Friday morning for the people that you are reaching and for God to work? Because the girls who go into the brothels pray. And there's been instances of them praying for God to send the girls in the brothels visions and dreams to call them out in their own hearts and in their own lives and in their own minds. And then they show up in the brothel, and the girl is like, oh my gosh, you were in my dream last week. You were in my dream. And I was on a beach, and there were these two fighting armies, and I was in the middle, and they were fighting for me, and I turned, and I saw you coming down from this big church on the hill. That is why we pray. That's why we pray. And that happens. Like I know that God is living and active. And when we pray, he moves because we are praying on the mission towards his heart. When he says, when you pray in my name, he means when you pray in my heart. When you pray my heart, I will move. And when you get down on your knees and you say, God, this is your heart, and you've given it to me, and I won't give up, he will move. And you will see his hand move in people's lives just because you prayed, not because you had a good strategy. Your strategies are going to fail unless God is going before you. It doesn't matter how good or professional or well thought. So it begins by praying, and it begins by going. And you kind of work out the messy details later. I'm sorry it is that way, but it is. And as a caveat, that is part of the reason why I started challenging you and praying that you'd be bold enough to do church differently than you've ever done. Because institutionally, we'll talk more about this in the workshop tonight, institutionally, we've structured ourselves in a way that makes it very difficult to reach the margins. I'm early, I think. Wow, I can't believe that. Usually I talk too much. Yeah.